There's a moment every DM dreads. When your players look at your intricately designed world, your detailed plot hooks, and your hours of prep, and just do something completely unexpected. Yeah, I've been there, more times than I care to admit. So let's talk about the biggest DM mistakes I've made, and more importantly, how I fixed them. Spoiler alert, it wasn't always pretty, but hey, isn't that half the fun of being a dungeon master? If you're a dungeon master, I've got news for you. You're gonna make mistakes. Pretty big ones, pretty little ones, and some weird ones. But you'll look back on them and wonder, what the hell was I even thinking? But here's the thing, every mistake is a chance to learn, improve, and make your games better. Let's dive into some of my DMing missteps and lessons I took away from them. Trust me, well, there's a lot of them. My first big mistake as a DM is simply overdoing it. I've always had an obsession creating these big world-ending plots. The kind where gods descend from their heavenly thrones and the entire realms are at stake, and everyone's running around like headless chickens. It sounds epic, right? It is, but it's also exhausting. And worse, I've found that sometimes focusing on too much of that epic stuff means I can kind of forget about the more personal and intricate stories that's not all the time, but sometimes my players really care more about. Not every campaign has to be Avengers Endgame. Sometimes your players just want The Office, but with swords and dragons. And you know what? That's okay. In fact, it's better than okay. It's refreshing. Focusing on the little moments, like a player character developing a bond with an NPC, or a group trying to outsmart a merchant, that can create those unforgettable moments that no apocalypse event could ever match. There was a moment in my campaign that had nothing to do with saving the world. It was my players arguing over who could haggle the best price for a card. Seriously, they spent a half an hour just role-playing in a market. And then I realised they'll probably remember this, and this is probably the stuff they actually will talk about. Not the elaborate plot twists that I spent weeks planning, but the silly little moments where their characters truly came to life. After that session, I made it a point to embrace these smaller player-driven moments. It shaped how I approach my prep work and storytelling. Instead of focusing solely on a grand narrative, I began weaving in opportunities for light-hearted interactions, knowing these often become the highlight of our game. Right, let's talk about planning. I've been on both ends of the spectrum here. I've overplanned sessions so intently that I knew the exact number of torches in a dungeon, only for my players to completely skip the dungeon. A week's work, poof, gone. Maggage. It's soul crushing. But then there's underplanning, and surprisingly, it actually works better for me. When I underplan, I can leave room for creativity. And honestly, my players thrive in that space, and I have way more fun rolling with their decisions than trying to force my overly detailed plan down their throats. It's like jazz, improvising, creating rhythms you never expected, and when your players join in, the result is magic. There was one session where I spent a week planning and designing elaborate puzzles, mapping out trials, and creating riddles. When the day came, I was so excited, and my players completely sidestepped all of it. And not because they were trying to be difficult, they just didn't pick up on the hooks. So that day, I learned flexibility and adaptability trump perfection every time. I've since embraced the art of improvisation, and honestly, it's made my games 10 times better. Another time, I walked into a session with 3 bullet points, a location, an NPC, and a conflict, and I thought, well, here goes nothing. You know what? It was one of the best sessions I've ever run. My players took the bare bones setup and turned it into a full-blown story arc. Sometimes less is really more. Alright, confession time. I have railroaded my players. Yep, I did the thing every DM tells you not to do. In my defense, they were new to D&D at the time, so they didn't know this. But as they got more experienced, I realized how much fun it is to let them thrive in the story. Now, I've learned to embrace your chaos, because D&D isn't about my story, it's about our collective story at the table. And here, letting go of the reins is terrifying. What if they derail the plot? What if they miss something important? What if they kill the NPC that I've worked 4 weeks on? The truth is, those moments of unpredictability can often lead to the best parts of your game. Players love, and I mean love, feeling like their choices matter. And as a DM, it's actually rewarding to see them forge their own path. Sure, it might not be the one you envisioned, but they'll never forget it. You'll never forget it. And isn't that the point? One time I had an entire villain monologue ready to go. Players, they killed him in 2 rounds before he could even speak one word. But instead of forcing the monologue and forcing them into a cutscene, I rolled with it, and his lackey deliverer on the final speech looked like a final desperate act. He looked weak in that moment, which turned into a hilarious moment that we still talk about to this day. One of my earlier campaigns started with the players as humble guild members, then gave them godlike powers, introduced time travel, and I think there was an acid trip in there somewhere. Looking back, it's a miracle anyone kept playing. What I've learned, pick a tone and stick with it. Us as humans enjoy consistency, and it helps make your world feel more grounded, even if it's full of dragons and magic. Having a clear tone doesn't limit your creativity, it just enhances it by providing a framework for it, whether it's gritty and serious or light-hearted and whimsical. Consistency allows your players to immerse themselves fully, and when they're immersed, that's when the game comes to life. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have variety. A light-hearted campaign can have moments of seriousness, and a dark campaign can have moments of laughter. The key is to weave them in naturally, like seasoning a dish. Too much of one thing, it feels unbalanced. Too much of another, it's more unbalanced. But eventually you'll find that exact, perfect ratio. Early on, I was a hardcore rules lawyer. It wasn't in the book, it wasn't happening. And sure, that approach works for some people, but for me, it sucked the fun out of the game. Then I discovered Index Card RPG, a system that's all about simplicity, and it blew my mind. Since then, I've adopted a rules light philosophy. The rules are there to help the game, not to strangle it. Let me tell you, it's been a game changer. When you let go of the rigidness of rules, you open the door for creativity. It's not about abandoning the rules entirely, about knowing when to bend them to keep the game flowing. Sometimes a clever idea from a player deserves success, even if the rules say otherwise. Those moments of bending the rules often become the highlights of sessions, but it's about creating a balance where everyone has fun. One time, one of my players wanted to combine 2 spells in a way that technically wasn't allowed. Instead of shutting it down, I said, let's see what happens. He did blow up half a city block, but it was one of the most creative solutions I've ever seen to an encounter. So always remember, sticking to the rules is fun, and it's needed sometimes, but a rules light approach can really help your game, and the stress being a dungeon master can take up sometimes. So, like I said everywhere else in this video, the biggest lesson I've learned as a DM is to let go. Let go of control. Seriously, I used to think I had to guide my players through every twist and turn of the story. But you know what? The best moments come from when you just take your hand off the wheel. When you let your players drive. You let the dice decide. It's terrifying at first, but eventually it becomes an infinite storytelling glitch. And like I said before, letting go doesn't mean abandoning structure altogether. It just means being open to some surprises. And when the players take a detour, just roll with it. Those detours are often where the best stuff happens, and your job as a DM is not to force a story, it's to guide it. You're not God, you're a referee. When you let the dice and the players guide the tale like that, you'll be amazed at what the story actually unfolds. Some of my favourite moments have come from saying yes to unexpected moments. A random NPC became a returning character because the players latched onto him, as always. Okay, so look, being a dungeon master isn't about being perfect. It's about creating a space where you and your players feel comfortable and tell an amazing story together. And maybe laugh a little when things go off the rails. So embrace the mistakes, learn from them, and more importantly, don't spend a week planning a dungeon that your players are gonna skip. You'll thank me later. So what about you? What's the biggest mistake you have made as a DM? And what did you learn from it? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear the stories. And if you enjoyed the video, give it a like and subscribe for more D&D tips, tricks, and tales from my table. Anyways, see you next time.